All right, so today we are going to continue. If you remember last class, we briefly started looking at this notion of presidential power. If you remember, we looked at Article 1 and we looked at Article 2 and saw how the Constitution addressed this idea of presidential power differently. And they said that they were real specific on legislative power, right? So it's not that Congress hasn't tried to grow their power, they certainly do. That is the nature of ambitious people, is to try to find ways to get what they want to get or what they want to accomplish. The presidency, though, wasn't so clearly defined. So the reality is that the Constitution actually supported the growth of presidential power. Before we look specifically at what the Constitution said, though, we want to look at what some presidents have actually said. Like, what were their views of presidential power? So this first quote that's on the screen is from Abraham Lincoln. And so what I want us to do is we're going to read through this quote, and we're going to try to understand what was Lincoln's perception about his own power. Does anybody want to read? Thank you, Kristen.
I have never understood that the presidency conferred upon me an unrestricted right to act. I did understand, however, that my oath to preserve the Constitution to the best of my ability imposed upon me the duty of preserving, by every indispensable means, that government, that nation of which the Constitution was the organic law. Was it possible to lose a nation and yet preserve the Constitution? I felt that measures otherwise unconstitutional might become lawful by becoming indispensable to the preservation of the Constitution, to the preservation of the nation. Right or wrong, I assume this ground and now avow it. I could not feel that, to the best of my ability, I had even tried to preserve the Constitution if I should permit the wreck of the government, country, and Constitution altogether. I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So when you look at that quote, obviously you have to consider the context. You have to think about, like, when Lincoln was president, you know, what were the things that he was being asked to do, and then we want to try to understand or summarize, like, specifically, like, what is he saying about his own power? About it? Or do you think, does anybody think, do you think you've got it? Do you understand what he's trying to say? No? No. Okay. Who thinks so? You think you got it? Go ahead, Megan. What do you think?
I guess he's just reestablishing that, like, the president's power is not unlimited, and that,
Okay.
like, during the Civil War, a lot of, like, the pressures of different groups were, like, shaping his policymaking.
Okay. So wartime president, his president is not unlimited, and the time is definitely going to affect the kind of policies. Absolutely. What is his relationship, what is the relationship to him of presidential power and the Constitution? Look at the quote. Say it again?
Just for anyone?
Yeah, anybody.
Well, like, the powers of the president are entirely to protect the Constitution.
Okay. They're not entirely to protect, is that what you said, or they are?
They are.
So the powers of the president are to protect the Constitution, for sure. Let's look at this sentence right here. He says, I felt that measures otherwise unconstitutional might become lawful by becoming indispensable to the preservation of the Constitution through the preservation of the nation. What is he saying there? Preston, do you get it?
I guess he's saying that you basically do what he needs to do to preserve the nation and the Constitution.
Okay. What if the Constitution says he can't do something? Can you do it?
Because they might have to change amendments for certain, like the
Do people ever break the law to serve a greater good?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are, if your wife goes into labor and you're, like, panicked, do you speed to get to the hospital? Without a doubt you do. There's your advice. Absolutely you do that, right? So that's a violation of the law, but there's a greater good involved, okay? So Lincoln is trying to tell us that. He says, look, I might do things that are unconstitutional. If I don't do them, we might not have a country. So I know it's been a while since some of you have studied the Civil War, but those of you that took APUSH last year, you should remember this. What did Lincoln do that was a direct violation of the Constitution? Do you remember, Ryan?
Yeah, he suspended habeas corpus.
Very good. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Article 1, Section 9 says if people are going to be detained, they have to be taken to a judge and told, this is what you're tried for. Lincoln issued an order during the Civil War that said, anybody that's opposing us, any of those Southern soldiers, you catch them and you lock them up and you keep them. That is a direct violation. But in his mind, if he didn't do that, the Constitution wouldn't be worth anything. Okay? All right, so on your paper in your little box, I'd like you to summarize, what is Lincoln's perspective on presidential power? So Lincoln's just your first picture. Okay, so our next quote is from, in the second box. Can you all tell who that is? That picture? Yes, Teddy Roosevelt. So not FDR, but Teddy Roosevelt. If you guys don't remember, he was the Progressive Era president. And think about the things you learned about Roosevelt. Like, what kind of things come to mind? Just shout them out. Teddy bear. Conservation of the environment. Bull Moose Party, good. Big stick diplomacy, like Latin America. Trust busting, yeah. Kind of get like a larger than life feeling, right? And he is also, like Lincoln, his head is carved in stone, okay? All right, so let's look at this quote. Who wants to read for me this time? Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Okay.
I decline to adopt the view that what was imperatively necessary for the nation could not be done by the president unless he could find some specific authorization for it. My belief was that it was not only his right but his duty to do anything that the needs of the nation demanded unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution or by the laws. I did not usurp power, but I did greatly broaden the use of executive power. I acted whenever and in whatever manner was necessary unless prevented by the direct constitutional or legislative prohibition. The course I followed was of regarding the executive as subject only to the people, and under the Constitution bound to serve the people affirmatively in cases where the Constitution does not explicitly forbid him to render the service.
Thank you so much. All right, so Roosevelt's taking a little bit different perspective, okay? He's regarded by many as also a really great president, right? And a lot of people revere the things that he did. But in terms of the Constitution, his perspective is a little bit different, okay? Why don't you guys talk about that with your table, and then we'll see if you can come up with like what it is that Teddy is saying in comparison to Lincoln. I'll give you just a minute to talk. All right, Bradley, you have it?
Yeah, basically he was saying that, like, if it says I can't do it in the Constitution, I'm gonna do it. So he was saying, I'm gonna do everything in my power that, like, the Constitution lets me, but even if the Constitution doesn't say I'm not allowed to do it, I'm gonna do it, because it never said I wasn't allowed to do it.
Okay, good. So here's my thought. This is like the kid who gets in trouble, and their justification for their action is, you didn't say I couldn't do it, right? So it's somebody that doesn't take a limited view of their own power. I don't need affirmation from you. I don't need you to grant me authority. If you told me I can't do it, I won't do it. But I don't need you to list all the things I can do. I did broaden the use of executive power. Like, he is acknowledging that he did things as an executive that some of his predecessors didn't do. That he laid a path for, look, there's things that we need to happen. And if you remember, back then, the Republican Party was considered the party that was more progressive in a lot of ways. Think about all the regulations and the things that were put in place, largely a result of his, pushing. Okay? All right, so you can summarize what he said, and then we're going to go on to our final quote. We'll see if anybody can recognize the picture of that man, also president.
They're also like.
So yeah, it doesn't copy great. Does anybody know? Very good. Okay, so what do you remember about Taft?
He's the heaviest president.
He was really big.
He is really big.
Mhm. Yeah, he did continue like a lot of the regulations and the things of, because he was the president right after Teddy. And like if you guys actually remember, he was a Republican as well, and when Teddy decided not to run, like he picked Taft as his successor. Like he said, that's who I want to carry this on. And then remember, he wasn't happy with like the Republican Party, and he wasn't happy with Taft, and so he ran for president again, and as the bull moose, and that's what caused, I guess, who comes next, Wilson? Yeah, so Wilson would have ended up winning. Okay? All right, so you guys told me, the first thing you told me is that he was really big, right?
Yeah.
Most people tell me he got stuck in a bathtub,
Yeah, he did.
right? Like that's the story. If your teacher didn't tell you he was so big he got stuck in the bathtub in the White House. Okay?
Really?
Mhm.
How big was the bathtub?
I don't know. He was a big guy. Uh-huh.
Like some like building or like he like instituted like some building or like monument or like program or something.
He did a lot of things. I mean, he did a lot. We just don't, people don't remember him the same way. You know, the way they remember the others.
The only thing I remember
Instead of
was
big stick, it was something else.
it was dollar diplomacy.
Dollar diplomacy. I'm so proud of you guys, because like that's like you're really truly remembering. But most people, like once they get removed, like they can't remember those things, you know. And you guys studied it last year, and obviously it stuck with you. But most students and most adults for sure, they don't remember all that stuff about Taft, because history has regarded him very differently than like what his actual behavior was. But part of the reason history has regarded him differently is because of this. So I want us to read through this quote and compare what his attitude was about the presidency versus the two we looked at before. So I need one more reader. All three of you raise your hand. I don't care. Somebody read it. It doesn't matter.
Go, Megan, go.
The true view of the executive function is, as I conceive it, that the president can exercise no power which cannot be fairly and reasonably traced to some specific grant of power or justly implied and included within such express grant as proper and necessary to its exercise. Such specific grant must be either in the federal constitution or in an act of Congress passed in pursuance thereof. There is no undefined
Residuum.
passed of power. The grant of executive power are necessarily in general terms in order not to embarrass the executive within the field of action plainly marketed for him, but his jurisdiction must be justified and vindicated by affirmative constitutional or statutory provision, or it does not exist.
All right. So his was a little more wordy, I think. What is his view of his power? What can presidents do? Go ahead.
Unlimited?
You think it's unlimited? Okay, what shows you that?
No, undefined residuum? I don't know if that was.
So residuum means that there is, if it's undefined, it means there's power that just lies in the presidency. And he says there isn't one. There's no just like, ooh, that's what I'm going to do. Go ahead.
So homeboy is saying that he's not gonna do anything that like isn't written out.
Very good. This last sentence right here, it is not written out either in the Constitution or in a law. It's not my power. I must be given affirmative authority to take action. So, truth be told, Taft is taking a very framers' intent view of the presidency. He is saying, well, maybe not the framers' intent, but he's taking a very literal view of the Constitution. He's saying, these are the powers Article 2, Section 2 gave me. Any power, then I can do that. But I'm not just going to go about doing whatever I can because I'm the president. This is what the president does. So he takes a very different view of himself. So I want you to just